Morning. I'm Pastor Kim Risedorph, and we are here together to worship God. Worship changes us. When we gather in community, when we sing the hymns, pray the prayers, explore the scriptures, we are changed. And just to test drive that idea, take a moment with me now and just notice what you have brought to worship. What expectations, what gratitudes, what part of if you're drained or grateful or joyful or anxious, just take a moment to kind of check in and notice what you bring to worship. And at the end of worship, we'll see how that feels again. We'll do a check-in at the end. Because worship restores our hope, our strength, our connection to the divine love that is always with us. Worship changes us. And if you are new to Asbury, so glad you're here. I hope that you experience exactly what you need for this day and for the week ahead. If you're familiar with Asbury, we're the ones that make this a community where all feel welcomed. So please look for the opportunity sometime this morning to greet and welcome someone you do not know or do not yet remember their name. So let's do that together. Today we continue a sermon series where we are preaching on questions that you have asked us. Last week, Pastor Chelsea preached on what does it mean to be a Christian. One of my favorite all-time sermons. It's on our Facebook page if you want to listen to it. Today we're looking at what does it mean to grow in faith, and why does it matter? What is it? What's the working definition of what it means to grow in faith? I think it means being connected to a power beyond ourselves and letting that fuel who we are in the world. That's what growing in faith allows us to do. It's always true that we're connected to a power of love, justice, and mercy. We just take this time to become newly aware of it. So when we bring in the light of Christ to begin worship, the light's a reminder of the Christ presence here with us. It's always with us, but this is when we remember it. And so as that light comes in and we prepare our hearts and our minds for worship, imagine that light traveling into this room, into you, and then out into the world to all the places where that light is needed. In that way, we prepare to worship God together. That was fun. You want to play one of those instruments? Join a choir. Yeah? Today we're exploring what it means to have faith and grow in faith, and I'm going to take one more pass at trying to define what faith is and what faith isn't. So often I think we've confused faith with belief. That if we believe certain doctrines or selected truths or stories, then we have faith. But whenever I hit thorny questions like that, I look to what Jesus says about faith. And Jesus describes faith as an experience, not as an intellectual exercise, but as an experience of that connection to God's presence right here. He calls it the kingdom of heaven. The experience of God's presence and being connected to God's presence right here and now. Not in the future, but right here, right now. And in fact, Matthew chapter 13 is chock full of descriptions of what it means to be in the kingdom of heaven, connected to God here and now. There's 7 of them in total. We're only going to read 2. And he starts out by describing how the kingdom of heaven is like, well, you hear it. 2 excerpts from Matthew chapter 13.
Jesus put to them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but when it has grown, is the greatest of all shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. He then told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. Jesus told the crowds all of these things in parables. Without a parable, he told them nothing. And this was to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet. I will open my mouth to speak in parables. I will proclaim what has been hidden from the foundation of the world.
Connecting to God, having that experience of faith, is like a tiny little mustard seed or a dab of yeast. Such small things. Maybe even what we would think of as insignificant things. But when we pay attention to the small things and give it our full heart's attention, we experience something of the divine, the holy, here and now. Mother Teresa said it this way: if we do the little things with great love, we'll change the world. So if you take nothing else home from worship, let's go forward after worship, in the week ahead, to do the little things with great love. It'll change us, and it'll change the world. Let's worship together as the children come forward and join us for the children's moment. Please pray with me. Gentle us, Holy One, into a deep breath, a letting go, so that softened by the silence and surrounded by the light, we may find once again our connection with you, our life, our hope, our strength, and our goodness. Amen. I love the line by Pope Benedict XVI in response to today's scripture. He said, "I have a mustard seed and I'm not afraid to use it." I didn't know he had a sense of humor, but there you go. To have a mustard seed and not to be afraid to use it speaks at one of the deepest truths of what it means to live in faith and grow in faith. Because the truth is, we all have a mustard seed of sorts in us. We all have a conviction, a knowing that there are things that really matter, that are important, that make life worth living. And no matter what else we fit in our day, we try to live with that integrity of living close to what our mustard seed truth tells us. It'll be different for all of us. I think one of my mustard seeds, I think we might have more than one of my mustard seeds is that there really is a divine, loving presence in the world that is connected to each one of us. That God is real and God is here. And I believe my life purpose is to cultivate and nurture that connection in myself and to devote myself to articulating, inviting, walking alongside others on the journey towards that connection. What is your mustard seed? The key is to let it be yours, not in comparison with anyone else, not better, not worse than anyone else, but your mustard seed. What is that? A question to carry with us, maybe to explore around the dinner table tonight, asking our loved ones. I know, my daughter's cringing just when I say that. Or maybe in small groups, or when you get together to rehearse in a choir, or to share with each other those mustard seed moments. Because when we say them out loud, we make a deeper commitment to living into them. The other part of that phrase, I have a mustard seed and I'm not afraid to use it, acknowledges the courage, the risk it takes to live out from that piece of truth within us. It's a risk because we don't have control about how that will work. Sometimes my mustard seed moments or efforts really don't work. They're failures. But to keep taking the risk gives life meaning, purpose, and joy. I was reminded of that when I read a story by Brené Brown. It's in her book, Daring Greatly. And she talks about an illustration when she had a mustard seed and wasn't afraid to use it. She writes, one of the most anxiety-provoking experiences I have ever had was speaking at a TED conference in Long Beach. In addition to having all the normal fears associated with giving a filmed 18-minute talk, in front of an intensely successful and high expectation audience. I was a closing speaker, she writes, for the entire event. For 3 days, I sat and watched some of the most amazing and provocative talks I've ever seen. And she realized that for herself at least, and perhaps for us as well, for others, we're afraid that our truth, our mustard seed, isn't enough without the bells and whistles, without editing, without impressing others and winning their approval. She said, I was afraid to walk out on stage and be myself. These people were too important, too successful, too famous. What encouraged her so? Where did she find her courage? She got to thinking about what she had just experienced in the last 3 days of listening to others give their talks. So many talked about giving risks and failing. She writes, the vast majority of folks I met during the 3 days leading up to my talk spoke openly about failing. It wasn't unusual for someone to tell you about 2 or 3 ventures or inventions or efforts that has failed as they explained their work or talked about their passions. I was blown away and inspired. You know, that's worth noting. When we feel overwhelmed, scared, anxious, often we find the courage we need if we pay attention to the little things around us. How often has it happened that a conversation, a blog, an article, a YouTube video, something provides an insight, a how-to, guidance about what you'll need later that day or in the week ahead. I love those moments. I think they're more than coincidence, or maybe coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. And I'd love to hear the stories of when that happens to you, when you have received just the right idea or inspiration you need for that moment. When we pay attention to that, we get the courage we need to use our mustard seed. I think one of my favorite moments of that is when, as a young child, well, my daughter was a young child, and she was in the back seat. You know how kids, when they sit in their car seats and their sturdy little legs just stick out right in front of them, and all their chubbiness and was right there. And I turned around to look at her at a stoplight, just to kind of appreciate her sitting in that car. But I was also wrestling with a feeling of inadequacy about a project that I had to do. And in that moment, she turned to me and she said, and she told me it was okay to tell this story. She turned to me and she said, "Let God love you." Where did she get that? It wasn't in any of the books we'd ever read to her. We had never said that out loud to her. I don't know where it came from. But in that moment, it spoke to my need. And it gave me what I needed to go forward. Back to Brene Brown. She's about to go out on the TED stage despite her fear. So she took a deep breath and she recited what she calls her vulnerability prayer. She said, "Give me the courage to show up and let myself, my truth, be seen." As she walked on the stage, she took a moment to draw on all the talks she had just heard in the previous 3 days. And this question popped into her mind. It was, what's worth doing, even if I fail? Those are mustard seed, that's having the courage to live our mustard seed truths. To take what resides in us as an inspiration, a truth, an awareness, and to risk failure because it really matters. You know those mustard seeds that we read about in chapter 13 of Matthew? They didn't grow into something bigger just so they could have the joy of growing. It wasn't about them. They grew so that they became a place of refuge for creatures around them. That's why we pay attention to our mustard seeds and aren't afraid to use them, so that we become a place of refuge, of hope, of peace, of serenity, of justice, of mercy in our world. Perhaps one of the greatest risks we take as human beings is to raise children, because we can't guarantee everything that will happen as we love and care and nurture for them. So we have these sacraments in the church, Sacraments are outward symbols of an inward grace, an inward truth, an inward mustard seed, where we as a community claim that we and our children are God's beloved. And so we have the joy now of claiming that for Brandon Patrick Lee. In a moment we'll baptize him, but first we'll sing the hymn, Child of Blessing, Child of Promise.